I never thought I'd sell my future for $200,000. But when you're watching your mother die slowly because you can't afford her treatment, you'd be surprised what you're willing to do. My name is Clara Bennett, and this is the story of how I married a stranger to save my family, and how that decision changed everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the masks we all wear. It started on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of gray, drizzly day that makes everything feel hopeless. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago, when my phone buzzed. It was another text from the billing department. Third one that week. The numbers didn't even feel real anymore. $847,000. That's what stood between my mother and the experimental treatment that could save her life. My dad had left us when I was 12, disappeared one night and never came back, so it was just me and Mom against the world. I was 24 years old, working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, and watching the strongest woman I'd ever known fade away in a hospital bed. I remember walking back to her room that day, trying to smile, trying to pretend like everything was gonna be okay. She saw right through me, of course. She always did. "Clara, honey," she said, her voice so weak it broke my heart, "you need to stop worrying so much. Whatever happens, happens." But I couldn't accept that. I wouldn't. I'd already sold my car, maxed out every credit card, begged every relative I could think of. Nothing was enough. That night I was scrolling through my phone, desperate, exhausted, when I saw an ad that made me stop cold. It was elegant, almost too elegant, with gold lettering on a black background. Seeking a compassionate young woman for a private arrangement. Significant compensation offered. Discretion required. Something about it felt different from the usual scams. Maybe it was desperation talking, but I clicked. The website was simple, professional. It explained that a wealthy elderly gentleman was seeking a wife for personal reasons. The marriage would be legal but largely ceremonial. In exchange, the bride would receive $500,000 upon signing the marriage certificate, with additional support provided as needed. I laughed out loud. It had to be fake, some kind of elaborate joke or worse. But then I saw the contact information, a legitimate law firm downtown, one I'd actually heard of. My hands were shaking when I typed out the email. I didn't sleep that night. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a conference room that probably cost more than my apartment building. The lawyer across from me was a woman named Patricia Holden, mid-50s, silver hair pulled back tight, eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Bennett," she said, sliding a folder across the table, "my client has reviewed your application. He'd like to meet you." I swallowed hard. "Can you tell me anything about him, like why he's doing this?" Patricia's expression didn't change. "Mr. Whitmore is 83 years old. He has his reasons, which he may choose to share with you himself. What I can tell you is that this arrangement is entirely legal, entirely voluntary, and the compensation is real." She opened the folder. Inside was a cashier's check for $200,000 made out to the hospital where my mother was being treated. "Consider this a gesture of good faith," Patricia said. "Should you agree to meet Mr. Whitmore and proceed with the arrangement, the remaining funds will be transferred upon completion of the marriage ceremony." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. $200,000 just for meeting him. "What's the catch?" I asked, because there had to be one. Patricia almost smiled. "The catch, Miss Bennett, is that you'd be marrying a man you've never met, nearly 60 years your senior, for money. Most people would call that catch enough." She wasn't wrong. But most people weren't watching their mother die. I took the check. The meeting with Mr. Whitmore was scheduled for the following Saturday at his estate outside the city. I spent the whole week trying to prepare myself, trying to imagine what kind of man would do something like this. I pictured someone frail, maybe cruel, definitely strange. Rich people were always strange, right? The estate was exactly what you'd expect from someone with that kind of money. Massive iron gates, a driveway that went on forever, grounds that looked like something out of a period drama. The house itself was more like a small castle, all gray stone and tall windows. A butler actually opened the door. I didn't even know butlers still existed outside of movies. "Miss Bennett," he said, like he'd been expecting me. "Mr. Whitmore will see you in the garden." The garden was beautiful, I'll give it that. Roses everywhere, a fountain in the center, the kind of peaceful you can only buy with serious money. And there, sitting in a wheelchair near the fountain, was a figure draped in shadows. As I got closer, my stomach tightened. He was wearing a mask. Not a Halloween mask or anything dramatic, just a simple surgical mask covering most of his face. Above it, I could see wispy white hair, pale skin spotted with age, eyes that were cloudy but somehow sharp. "Clara," he said, and his voice was rough like sandpaper on wood. "Thank you for coming." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "Please sit." He gestured to a bench nearby. I sat, keeping my distance, trying not to stare at the mask. "I suppose you're wondering about all this," he said. "The arrangement, the money, me." "Yeah," I admitted. "It's a lot to take in." He laughed, but it turned into a cough. "I imagine so. Let me be direct with you, Clara. I'm dying. Been for years, but the doctors say I've got maybe 6 months left now, maybe less. I have no family, no children, no one to leave my legacy to." He paused, watching me carefully. "What I want is simple. I want a wife, someone to be with me at the end, someone to inherit what I've built and do something good with it." I frowned. "Why not just donate everything to charity?" "Because charities are faceless," he said. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who wanted my money, not me. For once, I'd like to matter to someone, even if I have to pay for it." There was something so sad in his voice that it caught me off guard. I'd expected greed, manipulation, some kind of twisted game. Instead, I found loneliness. The kind that money can't fix. "The mask," I said quietly. "Why do you wear it?" He was silent for a long moment. "Vanity, I suppose, or shame. I was in an accident many years ago. The scars, they're not pleasant. I prefer not to frighten people." I nodded slowly. "Okay, okay," he sounded surprised. "You're not going to push." "Everybody's got their secrets," I said. "I'm not here to judge you, Mr. Whitmore. I'm here because my mom is dying too, and I'll do whatever it takes to save her." Something shifted in his eyes then. Something I couldn't quite read. "Then perhaps we understand each other better than I expected," he said. We talked for 2 more hours that afternoon. He asked about my mother, my childhood, my dreams. I told him things I hadn't told anyone in years. About how I'd wanted to be a teacher before money became everything. About how I'd given up on love because I didn't have time for it. About how scared I was, all the time, that I'd lose the only person who'd ever truly cared about me. He listened, really listened. Not like he was evaluating me, but like he genuinely wanted to know. By the time I left, I'd agreed to marry him. The wedding happened 2 weeks later. It was small, just Patricia the lawyer, the butler whose name I learned was Gerald, and a justice of the peace who seemed thoroughly confused by the whole situation. I wore a simple white dress I'd found at a thrift store. Mr. Whitmore, Henry, as he asked me to call him, wore a dark suit and his mask. When I said "I do," my voice didn't shake. I'd expected it to, but it didn't. This was a transaction, nothing more, a means to an end. The check cleared that night. $500,000 total, enough to cover my mother's treatment and then some. I cried when I saw the balance in the hospital's billing portal. All those zeros that had haunted me for months, finally gone. My mother was scheduled for her first treatment the following week, but I had something else to deal with first. My wedding night. I know what you're thinking, and honestly, I was thinking the same thing. What exactly did this arrangement involve? Patricia had assured me that Henry had no expectations beyond companionship, but still. I was technically his wife now. I was supposed to live in his house. I arrived at the estate around 8 p.m., my small suitcase feeling ridiculous against the grandeur of the place. Gerald showed me to my room, a beautiful suite with a 4-poster bed and windows overlooking the garden where I'd first met Henry. "Mr. Whitmore would like to see you in the master bedroom when you're settled," Gerald said, his face completely neutral. "Of course," I managed, my throat suddenly dry. I took my time unpacking, trying to calm my nerves. Whatever happened, I could handle it. I'd handled worse. Finally, I made my way down the hall to the master bedroom. The door was heavy oak, intimidating. I knocked. "Come in," Henry's voice called. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, candles everywhere casting dancing shadows on the walls. Henry was standing by the window, his back to me, still in his suit from the ceremony. "Clara," he said without turning around. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," I said. "We're married now. Kinda comes with the territory." He laughed softly. "I suppose it does." Then he turned to face me, and I noticed his hands were at his face, his fingers working at the straps of his mask. "I think it's time you saw me," he said. "The real me, no more masks between us." My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to expect. Scars, he'd said, disfigurement. I braced myself for something terrible. He pulled the mask away, and I froze, because the face looking back at me wasn't old. It wasn't scarred. It wasn't 83 years old. It was a man in his early 30s with sharp cheekbones, warm brown eyes, and a jawline that belonged on a magazine cover. What the? I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. Clara, wait, he said, stepping toward me. I can explain. But I was already backing toward the door, my mind racing. Who are you? What is this? Some kind of sick joke? My name is Henry Whitmore, he said calmly. The third. The man you thought you married was my grandfather. He died 8 years ago. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. So I'm not. This whole thing was real, he said. Everything was real. The marriage, the money, the arrangement. You just didn't know who you were really marrying. Why? I demanded, my voice cracking. Why would you do this? He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Because I needed to know. I needed to know if someone could want me, the real me, without knowing about the money or the name or any of it. So you what? Pretended to be a dying old man, made me think I was. I couldn't even finish the sentence. I felt sick. I know how it sounds, he said, but please let me explain. Just give me 5 minutes. Everything in me was screaming to run, to get as far away from this insane situation as possible, but something else kept me rooted to the spot. Curiosity, maybe, or the desperate need to understand what the hell was happening. 5 minutes, I said through gritted teeth. And then I'm gone. He nodded, gesturing to a chair by the window. I didn't sit. He took a deep breath. I was engaged once. Her name was Victoria. We'd known each other since college, dated for 4 years. I thought she loved me. I thought we were gonna build a life together. His jaw tightened. A month before our wedding, I found out she'd been sleeping with my business partner. For almost the entire time we were together, she didn't love me at all. She loved what my name could give her. The money, the status, the life. I didn't say anything. I just waited. After that, I became paranoid, I guess. Everyone who showed interest in me, I couldn't help wondering what they really wanted. Every relationship felt like a transaction. Every smile felt like a calculation. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with something I recognized. Pain. My grandfather used to tell me that the only way to really know someone's character is to see how they treat people who can't do anything for them. So I came up with this idea. Find someone who thought they were marrying a dying old man with nothing to offer but money, see how they treated him, and then... And then what? I snapped. Surprise, gotcha. No, he said quietly. Then decide if she was someone worth trusting with my heart. My anger faltered just a little. That's insane, you know that, right? Normal people don't do stuff like this. Normal people don't have every person in their life trying to use them, he said. I'm not saying it was right, I'm just saying it was the only way I knew how to protect myself. I stood there, arms crossed, trying to hold on to my fury. But it was slipping away, replaced by something I didn't want to feel, understanding. All those conversations, I said slowly. In the garden, you were really listening. Every word. And the marriage, is it even legal? Completely. Though I used a different name on the paperwork. Henry Whitmore is technically correct. It's just that everyone assumed it was my grandfather's name. So I'm married to you, I said. A billionaire tech CEO who catfished me into thinking he was a dying octogenarian. When you put it like that, it sounds really bad. It is really bad, he winced. I know, and I'm sorry, truly. I should have found another way, but I watched you, Clara. Not in a creepy way, I mean I observed you during our meetings. The way you talked about your mother, the way you refused to let anything break you. You didn't treat me like a meal ticket, you treated me like a person. Because I thought you were a lonely old man. Exactly, he said. And most people wouldn't have bothered. Most people would have counted down the days until the inheritance. You actually cared. I shook my head, overwhelmed. This is too much. I need air. I turned and left the room, ignoring him when he called my name. I needed to think. I ended up in the garden, sitting on the same bench where this whole crazy thing had started. The fountain bubbled quietly, the roses swayed in the evening breeze, and I tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do now. Part of me wanted to leave and never look back. Take the money that had already been given, make sure my mom got her treatment, and forget Henry Whitmore III ever existed. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, kept thinking about what he'd said. About trust. About fear. About how impossible it is to know if anyone actually sees you or just what you can give them. I understood that feeling. Better than I wanted to admit. When my dad left, it wasn't sudden. It was slow. He'd been pulling away for years, treating me and my mom like obligations instead of family. And when he finally disappeared, he didn't even leave a note. Just took his stuff and was gone. After that, I had trust issues of my own. I kept people at arm's length. Never let anyone get too close. Told myself it was smarter to rely on myself than risk getting hurt. but I had no idea what to do with all of this. I sat there for almost an hour before Gerald appeared with a cup of tea and a blanket. "Mr. Whitmore thought you might be cold," he said simply. "Which one?" I muttered. Gerald's lips twitched, the closest I'd ever seen him come to a smile. "The younger one, ma'am. He's quite distressed." "Good." But I took the tea anyway. It was getting chilly. I stayed in the guest room that night, barely sleeping, my mind running in circles. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to run away. Not yet. I needed more answers first. I found Henry in the dining room, looking like he hadn't slept either. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his perfect hair was disheveled. He looked up when I walked in, hope and fear warring on his face. "I have questions," I said flatly, "and you're going to answer every single one of them, honestly. No more masks, no more games." "Anything," he said immediately. "Whatever you want to know." I sat down across from him, keeping my expression neutral. "Let's start with the obvious. What happens now, legally, I mean?" "The marriage is valid," he said, "but if you want an annulment, I'll make it happen. You'll keep the money, keep everything you were promised. I'll make sure your mother gets the best care available regardless of what you decide about us." I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. "Why would you do that? If I leave, you get nothing out of this whole scheme." "Because this was never supposed to be a trap," he said quietly. "I wanted to find someone real. If you're not that person, then I have my answer." "And if I am?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He met my eyes, and for a moment I saw past the billionaire, past the games, past all of it, just a man who was terrified of being alone. "Then I'd like a chance," he said. "A real chance to know you, to let you know me. Not the disguise, not the money, just Henry." I took a slow breath. "You understand I'm still angry, right? What you did was manipulative and weird and probably a little unhinged. Completely fair assessment. And I'm not ready to just forgive and forget. You've got a lot of proving yourself to do." "I know." "Good." I stood up. "Then I guess we're gonna try this, whatever this is." The next few months were strange. Not bad strange, just different from anything I'd ever experienced. I stayed at the estate, partly because I had nowhere else to go and partly because I was genuinely curious about who Henry really was beneath all the masks and money. He was different than I expected. Not the cold, calculating billionaire I might have imagined. He was awkward sometimes, especially when trying to have normal conversations. He'd spent so much time in boardrooms and business meetings that he'd forgotten how to just be a person. But he tried. God, he tried so hard. He learned that I liked peonies better than roses, and suddenly the garden was full of them. He found out I'd always wanted to learn piano and hired an instructor without making a big deal about it. He remembered every detail of every conversation we'd had, even the ones from when I thought he was someone else entirely. My mother's treatment was working. She'd started to improve almost immediately, color returning to her cheeks, strength returning to her body. When I finally told her the truth about my marriage, she laughed until she cried. "Only you, Clara," she said, shaking her head. "Only you would accidentally marry a young billionaire while trying to save my life. I didn't plan it. No one ever plans the best things, sweetheart." She met Henry a few weeks later, and to my surprise, they got along beautifully. He was charming and attentive, and he actually listened when she talked about her garden and her book club and all the things she'd missed during her treatment. "He looks at you like you hung the moon," she told me later. "Whatever weird way you two got together, I think it might be real." I was starting to think so too, but I wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. There was still too much uncertainty, too many walls I hadn't taken down. The first real crack in those walls came about 3 months into our arrangement. I'd been having a bad day, one of those days where everything felt heavy and wrong for no particular reason. I'd retreated to the library, curled up in a corner with a book I wasn't really reading. Henry found me there around midnight. "Clara," he sounded worried. "Gerald said you'd been in here for hours." "I'm fine," I said automatically, but my voice cracked, and suddenly I wasn't fine at all. I was crying, ugly crying, the kind I never let anyone see. Instead of running away or trying to fix it, Henry just sat down next to me and waited. He didn't say anything, didn't try to touch me or offer empty comfort. He just sat there, present, patient. "I don't know why I'm crying," I finally managed. "I have everything I wanted. Mom's getting better. I don't have to worry about money anymore. But I still feel like I'm waiting for something terrible to happen. Like this can't possibly be real." "That makes sense," he said quietly, "when you've spent your whole life fighting. It's hard to know what to do when the fight's over." I looked at him, tears still streaming down my face. "How would you know?" "Because I've been fighting too," he said. Different battles, maybe, but the same exhaustion, the same fear that the moment you let your guard down, everything will fall apart. He turned to face me, his expression more open than I'd ever seen it. I spent years building walls, Clara. Convincing myself that I didn't need anyone, that trust was just another weapon people used against you. But I was miserable, empty, and I didn't even realize it until I met you. In the garden, I whispered, when you were pretending to be dying. He smiled sadly. I wasn't pretending about everything. I told you about my loneliness, about wanting to matter to someone. That was real, more real than anything I'd said in years. I don't know who moved first. Maybe we both did. But somehow his arms were around me, and I was holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was just comfort, connection. Two broken people admitting they didn't want to be alone anymore. That was the night everything changed. We started talking, really talking. He told me about his childhood, growing up in the shadow of the Whitmore name, never knowing if anyone liked him for himself. I told him about my dad leaving, about the years of struggling, about how I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve nice things. We were both so damaged, but somehow our broken pieces seemed to fit together. Over the following months, I fell in love with him. Slowly, quietly, like winter giving way to spring. I loved the way he laughed, rare but genuine. I loved his curiosity about everything, his hidden kindness, the way he remembered details that others would forget. I loved that he still brought me tea when I couldn't sleep, that he read the books I recommended, that he asked about my day and actually wanted to know the answer. But I also loved who he was becoming. The walls were coming down, not just mine, but his too. He started trusting me with things he'd never told anyone. His fears, his failures, the parts of himself he thought were unlovable. And I showed him that I wasn't going anywhere. One evening, about 8 months after our bizarre wedding, we were sitting on the patio watching the sunset. My mother had been declared in remission the week before, and the relief of it was still settling into my bones. "Clara," Henry said suddenly, "I need to ask you something." I turned to look at him, and my breath caught. He was holding a ring box, a small, velvet box that trembled slightly in his hands. "I know we're technically already married," he said, his voice unsteady. "But that marriage was built on lies and desperation. I don't want that anymore. I want to build something real with you, something true." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant, a single diamond that caught the fading light. "Clara Bennett, will you marry me? For real this time. No masks, no games, just us." I stared at him, this beautiful, broken, complicated man who turned my life completely upside down, and I started laughing. "What?" He looked panicked. "Are you laughing? Is that a no?" "It's not a no, you idiot," I said through my laughter. "It's just, do you realize how crazy this is? You're proposing to your own wife." His face relaxed into a smile. "So that's a yes." "Yes," I said, still laughing, tears prickling at my eyes. "Yes, Henry, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto my finger, right next to the simple band I'd worn since our first wedding. Then he kissed me, soft and sweet, and the world felt perfectly, impossibly right. We got married again 3 months later. A real wedding this time, with my mother there crying happy tears and his friends who were slowly becoming my friends too. I wore a white dress that actually fit, and he wore a smile that lit up the whole room. When I walked down the aisle toward him, I thought about all the twists and turns that had brought us here. The desperation, the lie, the anger and the understanding and the slow, careful building of trust. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been conventional. But it was ours, and it was real. The first year of our real marriage was like learning a new language together. We had to figure out how to be partners, not just two people circling each other with carefully constructed walls. Henry had spent so long hiding behind money and masks that intimacy terrified him. I had spent so long being strong for everyone else that letting someone take care of me felt foreign and uncomfortable. But we worked at it, every single day. He learned to tell me when he was struggling instead of retreating into silence. I learned to ask for help instead of drowning in my own stubbornness. We fought sometimes, real fights about real things, but we always came back to each other, always found our way through. My mother moved into the guest house on the estate about 6 months after our second wedding. She'd been in remission for nearly a year by then, stronger than she'd been in ages, but I still worried about her being alone. When I suggested she move closer, she pretended to resist for about 10 minutes before admitting she'd already been eyeing the garden and making plans for what she'd plant. "You know I'm not doing this because I need to be taken care of," she said firmly. "I'm doing this because my daughter finally found happiness, and I want to be nearby to watch it unfold." Having her close felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. For the first time in my life, I had everything I'd ever wanted. A mother who was healthy, a home that felt safe, a partner who loved me for exactly who I was. But life has a way of testing you, right when you think you've figured it out. The test came in the form of a woman named Diana Calloway. I first heard her name about 14 months into our marriage. Henry came home from a board meeting looking like someone had punched him in the stomach. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. He paced the living room, running his hands through his hair the way he did when he was anxious. "Diana's back," he said finally. "She's on the board now, bought enough shares to force her way in." I frowned. "Diana, wait, is that the ex, the one who cheated on me with my business partner?" "Yeah, that's the one." My protective instincts flared immediately. "How the hell did she get board seats? I thought you controlled the majority." "I do, but the minority shareholders have been organizing. Diana's leading them. She's been planning this for years, apparently." He stopped packing and looked at me, his face tight with frustration. "She wants back in, Clara, not just to the company, to my life." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "What do you mean?" "She made it very clear at the meeting today, said she'd made mistakes, said she never should have let me go. She's positioning herself as the wronged party who deserves a second chance." "That's insane. She cheated on you." "She's rewriting history. Saying I was distant, that I drove her away, that Marcus seduced her when she was vulnerable." Henry's jaw tightened. "And some people are buying it." I walked over to him and took his hands, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Henry, look at me. Whatever game she's playing, we'll handle it together. You're not alone anymore, remember?" Some of the tension left his shoulders. "I know, I didn't expect this. I thought that part of my life was over." "We'll figure it out," I said firmly. "I need you to tell me everything. No secrets, no trying to protect me from the ugly parts. If we're gonna fight this, we fight it as a team." He nodded slowly. "You're right. You're absolutely right." Over the next few weeks, I learned exactly what kind of person Diana Calloway was, and it wasn't pretty. She started small, subtle jabs in interviews about how Henry had never really recovered from their relationship, how he'd rushed into a marriage with a nobody as some kind of rebound. She never said my name, but everyone knew who she meant. I tried to ignore it at first. Tabloid gossip didn't matter. I knew who I was, and I knew Henry loved me. But then she escalated. Photos started appearing online. Old pictures of Henry and Diana at events, carefully curated to make them look like the perfect couple. Articles speculating about rekindled romances and secret meetings. None of it was true, but the narrative was taking hold. People started looking at me differently when I went out, whispering behind their hands, giving me pitying looks like I was some tragic figure who didn't realize her husband was slipping away. The worst part was the doubt. Not about Henry, never about him, but about myself. Was I really the right person for this world? Could I compete with someone like Diana, who knew all the rules, who had been playing this game her whole life? One night, I finally broke down and told Henry how I was feeling. We were in bed, the room dark except for the moonlight streaming through the windows. "Sometimes I wonder if she's right," I whispered. "About me being a nobody, about not belonging here." Henry was quiet for a long moment. Then he rolled over to face me, his hand finding mine in the darkness. "Clara, listen to me. Diana is terrified of you. That's why she's doing all this." I let out a skeptical laugh. "Terrified of me?" "Yes. Because you have the one thing she could never get, no matter how hard she tried. You have my heart, completely, without games or manipulation or any of the tactics she used. You just showed up and loved me, and that drives her crazy." His thumb traced circles on my palm. "She's trying to make you doubt yourself because she knows if you stay confident, she doesn't stand a chance. Don't give her that power." I lay there in the dark, letting his words sink in. He was right. I was playing Diana's game, letting her define my worth, letting her make me feel small. But I wasn't small. I was the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to save her mother. The woman who'd walked into an impossible situation and found love anyway. The woman who'd taught a billionaire how to trust again. Diana Calloway had no idea who she was dealing with. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. If Diana wanted a fight, she was gonna get one. But I wasn't going to fight dirty. I was going to fight smart. I started by reaching out to Henry's PR team, something I'd avoided since we got married because the spotlight made me uncomfortable. But comfort was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. "I want to do an interview," I told them. "A real one where I tell our story." They were skeptical at first. I wasn't trained for media appearances. I didn't have talking points or polished answers. But that was exactly the point. When the interview aired 2 weeks later, it wasn't slick or rehearsed. It was just me, talking honestly about how Henry and I had met, about the struggles we'd faced, about building a real relationship from an unconventional start. I didn't attack Diana. I didn't even mention her by name. I just told the truth. And I let people see who I really was. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from people who related to my story, who admired the honesty, who were touched by the genuine love between me and Henry. The narrative shifted almost overnight. Diana tried to regain control, but she'd miscalculated. She'd spent so long crafting a perfect image that people were hungry for something real, and I was as real as it got. Her influence on the board started slipping. Shareholders who had supported her began having second thoughts. Within 3 months, she'd quietly sold her shares and disappeared from our lives entirely. The night we got the news, Henry opened a bottle of champagne and we sat on the patio watching the stars. "You know," he said, "when I came up with that ridiculous plan to find a wife, I never imagined someone like you. Someone who would beat your ex at her own game." I grinned. "Someone who would make me want to be better." He turned to face me, his expression serious. "I spent so long hiding from life, Clara, convinced that trust was impossible, that everyone wanted something from me. But you changed everything. You showed me what it feels like to be truly known, and loved anyway." My throat tightened with emotion. "You showed me the same thing, you know. I thought I had to do everything alone. That needing someone made me weak, but needing you, it just makes me human." He leaned in and kissed me, soft and slow, tasting like champagne and promises. We stayed out there until the sun started to rise, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for the future. It was the happiest I'd ever been. 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I wasn't expecting it. We hadn't been trying, hadn't even really discussed the possibility. But there it was, 2 pink lines staring up at me from a test I'd taken on a whim. I sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes just processing. A baby, a tiny human that was half me and half Henry. A whole new person we'd be responsible for raising. The thought was terrifying, and exhilarating, and overwhelming. I told Henry that night over dinner, or rather, I tried to. The words kept getting stuck in my throat. "Clara, you've been weird all evening," he finally said. "Just tell me what's going on." "I'm pregnant." The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other. "I took a test today. Actually, I took 3 tests. They were all positive. I made an appointment with a doctor to confirm, but I'm pretty sure that's... Yeah, pregnant." Henry stared at me for a long, frozen moment. Then his face split into the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "A baby." His voice cracked on the word. "We're having a baby." "We're having a baby," I confirmed, and suddenly I was crying, happy tears streaming down my face. He was around the table in an instant, pulling me into his arms, holding me like I was the most precious thing in the world. "I'm gonna be a dad," he kept saying like he couldn't believe it. "We're gonna be parents." "Terrifying, right?" I laughed through my tears. "The most terrifying thing ever," he agreed. "And the most amazing." The pregnancy wasn't easy. I had morning sickness that lasted way longer than the first trimester, back pain that made sleep impossible, and hormonal mood swings that drove us both crazy. But Henry was there for all of it. He went to every appointment. He read every parenting book he could find. He rubbed my feet when they were swollen and held my hair when I was sick. He even took classes on infant care, coming home to practice swaddling techniques on a stuffed animal until he had it perfect. "You know you're being ridiculous," I told him one night, watching him carefully arrange the nursery for the 10th time. "I just want everything to be right," he said, adjusting a mobile over the crib. "Our kid deserves perfect." "Our kid deserves love," I corrected gently, "and they're gonna have plenty of that." He paused, looking around the room we'd spent months preparing. "I keep thinking about my childhood," he admitted. "All the nannies and tutors. My parents were always working, always somewhere else. I don't want that for our baby." "Then we won't do that," I said simply. "We'll do it differently." "Promise, promise." My mother was over the moon about becoming a grandmother. She started knitting baby clothes immediately, even though I told her it was way too early. "It's never too early for love," she said, needles clicking away. "This baby is already the luckiest little person in the world." She moved into the main house during my 3rd trimester, insisting she wanted to be close in case I needed anything. I think she was just as excited as we were. Our daughter was born on a rainy Tuesday in March. Her name was Emma Grace Whitmore, and she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. 7 pounds, 4 ounces of pure perfection. When the nurse placed her in my arms for the first time, everything else faded away. The pain of labor, the exhaustion, the fear. All of it dissolved into this overwhelming wave of love so intense it took my breath away. Henry sat beside me, tears streaming down his face as he looked at our daughter. "She's got your eyes," he whispered. "And your stubbornness," I teased weakly. "She took her sweet time getting here." He laughed, this watery, joyful sound that filled the room. "She's absolutely perfect." My mother was waiting in the hallway when they finally let her in. She took one look at Emma and burst into tears. "My granddaughter," she kept saying. "My beautiful granddaughter." The three of us sat together in that hospital room, passing Emma back and forth, marveling at her tiny fingers and her soft wisps of hair. And I thought about how far we'd all come. My mother, who'd almost died before getting the treatment she needed. Henry, who'd hidden behind masks and money because he was terrified of being hurt. Me, who'd sold her future to save someone she loved and found so much more than she'd bargained for. Life had thrown us all curveballs, but somehow we'd ended up here, together, happy. The first few months of parenthood were chaos, beautiful, exhausting, mind-blowing chaos. Emma was a good baby as far as bobbies go, but she still needed constant attention. Henry and I operated on almost no sleep, passing her back and forth in a blur of feedings and diaper changes and desperate attempts to soothe her cries. But even in the hardest moments, there was joy. The way Emma's face lit up when she saw one of us. Her first real laugh, a sound so pure it made both of us cry. The quiet moments at 3 a.m. when it was just me and her in the rocking chair, the rest of the world asleep. Henry threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything. He learned all the songs, all the games, all the tricks to make Emma giggle. He set up a play area in his home office so she could be with him while he worked. He rearranged his entire schedule to make sure he was home for bedtime every night. "You know you don't have to be perfect," I told him once, watching him stress over whether he'd chosen the right developmental toys. "She just needs you to be present." "I know," he said, "but I want to give her everything I didn't have. A father who's actually there, who pays attention, who makes her feel like she's the most important thing in the world." "She already has that," I said softly. "Look at her face when she sees you. That baby adores you." He looked at Emma, who was currently trying to stuff her entire fist in her mouth while staring at him with adoring eyes. And his expression softened into something so tender it made my heart ache. We were gonna be okay, more than okay. We were gonna be amazing. As Emma grew, so did our family. When she was 2, we found out I was pregnant again. This time we were trying. A little brother for Emma, we hoped, or maybe a sister. Either way, we wanted our daughter to have what neither Henry nor I had growing up. A sibling to share life with. The pregnancy was easier the second time around. I knew what to expect, and my body seemed to remember the drill. Henry was calmer too, less anxious about every little thing, more confident in his ability to handle whatever came our way. Emma was fascinated by my growing belly. She'd press her tiny hands against it and talk to the baby inside, telling elaborate stories about the adventures they'd have together. "Baby gonna play with me," she'd announce confidently. "We gonna be best friends." "That's right, sweetheart," I'd tell her. "You're gonna be the best big sister ever." Our son arrived on a crisp October morning, exactly on his due date. We named him Lucas James Whitmore, and he came into the world screaming at the top of his lungs, already making his presence known. He was different from Emma in almost every way. Where she'd been calm and observant, Lucas was loud and demanding. Where she'd slept through the night by 3 months, he seemed determined to never let us rest. But he was also fiercely loving, clinging to Henry and me like we were his whole world. Which, I suppose, we were. Watching Henry with our children was one of the greatest joys of my life. He'd come so far from the guarded, lonely man I'd first met in that garden. Now he was crawling around on the floor playing pretend, reading bedtime stories in funny voices, carrying both kids on his shoulders through the house while they shrieked with laughter. "You're a natural," I told him one evening after he'd finally gotten both kids to sleep. He collapsed onto the couch beside me, exhausted but smiling. "I had a good teacher." "Who, your nanny?" he laughed. "No, you, watching you love people. It taught me how." I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "We taught each other." My mother was in heaven with 2 grandchildren to spoil. She'd take them on adventures in the garden, teaching them about flowers and bugs and the magic of growing things. She'd bake cookies with Emma and let Lucas make a mess with the flour. She'd tell them stories about when I was little, embarrassing tales that made them giggle and made me groan. "Grandma says you used to cry when you saw butterflies," Emma reported one day, looking at me with suspicious eyes. "I was too, and they were very big butterflies." Emma was scared of butterflies, Lucas chimed in, delighted. Still are. Absolutely not, I'm very brave now, Henry snorted from across the room. Says the woman who made me kill a spider last week. That spider was the size of my hand. The kids dissolved into laughter, and I couldn't even be mad. This was what I'd always wanted. A family. Real, messy, wonderful family. As the years passed, I often thought about how different things could have been if I'd never clicked on that strange ad. If I'd run away that first night when Henry revealed his true face. If I'd let Diana's manipulation break us apart. So many moments where the story could have gone another way. But it didn't. Against all odds, we'd found each other. We'd built something beautiful from the strangest foundations imaginable. And every single day, I was grateful. When Emma was 7 and Lucas was 5, we decided to renew our vows. Not because there was anything wrong with our marriage, but because we wanted to celebrate how far we'd come. We held the ceremony in the garden where we'd first met. The same fountain, the same roses, the same bench where I'd sat and listened to an old man talk about loneliness. Only now, the garden was filled with people who loved us. Friends we'd made together over the years. Colleagues who'd become like family. And of course, my mother, beaming in the front row with Emma and Lucas on either side of her. Henry wore a simple gray suit, no mask, no pretense. Just him, open and honest, the man I'd fallen in love with. I wore a white dress that flowed like water, flowers woven into my hair. When we stood facing each other, I felt the same flutter of nerves I'd felt at both our previous weddings. But this time there was no fear, no uncertainty, just pure, unwavering love. Clara, Henry began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. When I met you, I was hiding. From the world, from myself, from the possibility that anyone could truly love me for who I am. I'd built so many walls that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. He took a deep breath. But you saw me anyway. You looked past the masks and the money and the fear, and you found the person underneath. And then you did something even more miraculous. You stayed. His voice cracked slightly, and I saw tears gathering in his eyes. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. That trust isn't a trap. That love, real love, is worth every risk. I spent years trying to protect myself from getting hurt, and all I did was hurt myself. You showed me a different way. He reached out and took my hands, his grip warm and sure. I promise to keep choosing you every single day, to keep growing with you, learning with you, building this life we've created together. You're my partner, my best friend, my home. I will spend the rest of my days making sure you never doubt how much you mean to me. By the time he finished, tears were streaming down my face. I didn't even try to stop them. Henry, I managed, my voice wobbling. I came to you out of desperation. I was broke, scared, willing to do anything to save my mother. I thought I was making a transaction, trading my future for money I desperately needed. I smiled through my tears. I had no idea I was about to find everything I'd ever wanted. You took a chance on me when you had every reason not to. You forgave me when I didn't deserve it. You pushed me to be better, to be braver, to stop hiding from the world and actually live in it. I squeezed his hands tighter. I spent my whole life thinking I had to be strong on my own, that needing people made me weak, but loving you, being loved by you, it's the strongest I've ever felt. You didn't complete me because I was already whole, but you made my life so much fuller. So much richer, so much more than I ever dreamed it could be. I glanced over at our children, at my mother, at the garden blooming around us. Look at what we've built, Henry. Look at this family, this life. It started with desperation and deception and 2 people who'd forgotten how to trust. And now it's the most beautiful thing I've ever been part of. I met his eyes again, letting him see everything I felt. I promise to keep loving you through whatever comes next. The easy days and the hard ones, the laughter and the tears, the moments of doubt and the moments of absolute certainty. I'm yours, Henry Whitmore, today, tomorrow, forever. The officiant pronounced us renewed, and Henry kissed me while our children cheered and our guests applauded. It was the same garden, the same couple, but everything was different. Everything was exactly as it should be. The reception was joyful chaos. Emma and Lucas ran around with the other kids, high on sugar and excitement. My mother danced with Gerald, who turned out to be a surprisingly good dancer. Henry and I moved together on the dance floor, swaying to a slow song while the world spun around us. No regrets, he murmured against my hair. Not a single one, I replied. You. Only that I didn't find you sooner. I pulled back to look at him. If you'd found me sooner, we might not have been ready. Maybe we needed all those years of struggling to appreciate what we have now. He considered this. You might be right, you usually are. Remember that next time we argue about where to order dinner. He laughed, pulling me close again. Deal. As the night wound down and the guests departed, our little family gathered in the garden one last time. Emma was half asleep on Henry's shoulder. Lucas had crashed completely, sprawled across my mother's lap. Fairy lights twinkled overhead and the fountain sang its quiet song. Thank you, I said softly, looking around at the people I loved most in the world. For what? Henry asked. For this, all of this, for being my family. My mother smiled at me, that warm, knowing smile that had got me through my darkest days. We're the lucky ones, sweetheart, every single one of us. She was right. We were lucky. But we'd also worked for it, fought for it, chosen it again and again, even when it was hard. That's what family was, I realized. Not just the people you were born to, but the people you chose. The people who chose you back, and we had chosen each other. Life continued to unfold in beautiful, unexpected ways. When Emma was 10, she announced that she wanted to be a teacher. Like you wanted to be, Mom, she said. Before everything got complicated. I nearly cried. I'd mentioned that dream to Henry once, years ago, when we were still figuring each other out. He must have told her. You'd be an amazing teacher, I told her. You already are. Look at how patient you are with Lucas. He's not that hard, she said with a shrug. You just gotta explain things in ways he understands. I looked at my daughter, already wiser than I'd been at twice her age, and felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly knocked me over. Lucas, meanwhile, was determined to be an inventor. He spent hours in the garage with Henry, taking things apart and putting them back together, creating contraptions that mostly didn't work but occasionally did something surprising. He's got your brain, I told Henry one afternoon, watching them through the window. And your stubbornness, Henry replied, grinning. We've created monsters. The best kind of monsters. My mother stayed healthy, defying every statistic and every doctor's cautious prediction. The treatment had worked better than anyone expected, and year after year she remained in remission. She attributed it to love. You can't underestimate the healing power of a good family, she'd say. Medicine helps, but love saves. She watched her grandchildren grow. She danced at our vow renewal. She planted a memorial garden for all the people she'd lost along the way and tended it with the same care she gave to everything else in her life. When she finally passed, it was peaceful. She was 92 years old, surrounded by family with a smile on her face. I'm not sad, she told me in her final days. I got more time than I ever expected, more love than I deserved, more joy than I knew was possible. She squeezed my hand weakly. You gave me that, Clara. You and Henry and those beautiful bobbies, you gave me everything. I held her hand and cried, not from grief but from gratitude. She'd lived to see Emma graduate high school. She'd met Lucas's first girlfriend. She'd watched me become the person I was always meant to be. Her death left a hole in our lives that never fully closed. But it also left a legacy, a garden that bloomed every spring, stories that the kids repeated to their own children, a way of looking at the world that emphasized love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. She taught us all so much, and we carried those lessons forward. Henry and I grew old together, just like we'd promised. Our hair turned gray. Our bodies slowed down. The estate that had once felt impossibly grand became simply home, filled with decades of memories and generations of love. Emma did become a teacher. A brilliant one, beloved by her students, changing lives the way she'd once changed ours. She married a kind man named David, and they gave us 3 grandchildren who inherited their grandmother's determination and their grandfather's charm. Lucas started a company that developed technology for accessible education, making learning possible for kids who couldn't afford traditional schooling. He never forgot where his father had come from or the walls that money could build between people. He dedicated his life to tearing those walls down. Our grandchildren called us Nana and Pop Pop. They ran through the same garden where their parents had played, climbed the same trees, splashed in the same fountain. And sometimes, when the light was just right, I could almost see 2 strangers meeting for the first time on a bench, one of them hiding behind a mask, both of them terrified of trust. Those strangers felt like different people now, and in many ways they were. The final chapter of our story was quiet but beautiful. Henry and I spent our last years doing all the things we'd never had time for when we were younger. We traveled the world, finally taking that trip to Italy I'd always dreamed of. We learned new skills together, him trying to paint, me attempting to play piano. We sat on the patio every evening, watching the sunset over the garden, talking about everything and nothing. You know what I keep thinking about? Henry said one evening, his voice raspy with age but still so familiar. What's that? That stupid plan, the mask, the wheelchair, pretending to be my grandfather. He shook his head slowly. I was so convinced it was the only way. I had to trick someone into loving me because no one ever would otherwise. Pretty dumb plan, I agreed. The dumbest. He turned to look at me, his eyes still that same warm brown I'd first seen all those years ago. But it brought me you, so maybe it wasn't so dumb after all. I reached over and took his hand, our fingers intertwining like they had thousands of times before. I think you would have found me anyway, some way, somehow. We were always gonna end up here. You believe that? I do. Some people are just meant to find each other. We just took a more interesting route than most. He laughed, that same joyful sound I'd fallen in love with decades ago. That's one way to put it. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one. The same stars we'd watched on our first real night together. The same stars our children and grandchildren watch now. No regrets? I asked, echoing the question he'd asked me so many times over the years. Not a single one, he replied. This life with you has been everything I never knew I wanted and more than I ever deserved. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every twist, every turn, every moment of doubt, because it all led here. I leaned my head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. Same, I whispered. Every single moment. I'd choose you again and again and again. He pressed a kiss to my hair. Promise, promise. We stayed there until the moon rose high, two old souls who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd built a love story from the strangest beginnings, who'd learned that the best things in life often come in the most unexpected packages. And when I finally drifted off to sleep that night, I dreamed of a garden full of roses, of two strangers meeting on a bench, of a mask falling away to reveal not a lie but a truth. The truth that love, real love, is always worth the risk, always worth the wait, always worth everything. Our story had started with desperation, deception, and two people too afraid to trust. It had grown through struggle, forgiveness, and the slow, careful building of something real. And it had ended exactly where all the best stories end, with two people, surrounded by family, surrounded by love, living out their days in peace and joy and gratitude. The old man I had to marry for money wasn't old at all. He was just lost. And so was I, but we found each other. We saved each other. And we lived happily ever after with big smiles on our faces and love in our hearts until the very end. That's the thing about life, I've learned. You never know where the twists and turns will take you. You never know which desperate choice will lead to your greatest joy. You just have to keep going, keep hopping, keep believing that somewhere out there your person is waiting. Mine was wearing a mask and pretending to be 83 years old. But he was mine, and I was his, and together we were home. Forever.